and I'm a project coordinator with the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress. Today, we're exploring core concept 2. Trauma occurs within a broad context that includes children's personal characteristics, life experiences, and current circumstances. We have 2 wonderful speakers here who will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Wanda Vargas. I am a Afro-Latina. I have been in the field of psychology for about 20 years. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have been director of a trauma clinic for children, young children, and families exposed to all forms of trauma. It's actually in the community where I grew up, so it's really meaningful to me. My main passion and work, aside from working with children and families, is really thinking about and working on supporting marginalized populations through traumatic experiences. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Fernandez Marcote. I am a clinical psychotherapist living and working in Philadelphia. I currently work for a healthcare center, a nonprofit called Puentes de Salud, where I do lots of work around behavioral health with the Latino immigrant community in Philadelphia. From individual psychotherapy to facilitating groups to providing trainings and workshops for community members. I've also recently started my PhD in public health at Drexel University, and I'm excited to continue those 2 projects simultaneously, and interested in learning and doing more work around merging what's happening in academia and research and what's happening on the ground and community-led efforts.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to exploring this topic with y'all. Can you please provide an example of how a person's experiences and identities impact the way they experience trauma?
I think the important thing here is to recognize that trauma isn't only about the thing that happened, but it's thinking about who it happened to and who they are, what they bring into the experience, right? So we really have to look at a person's identity. And if we look at several factors of their identity, we might look at their ability, physical, emotional, mental. We might look at their age, their race, ethnicity, culture, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and their socioeconomic status, right? So what is their positionality in the world? Because I think those things in varying degrees are going to impact their experience of an event and whether that becomes a traumatic experience for them or not. So for example, if you have 2 different people that experience the same thing, a man, a woman, one person is Caucasian, the other person is Latina. Let's say they lose their jobs. That's going to hit them differently, potentially, right? So a Caucasian man may have lots of connections in the business, feel like, okay, I lost my job, but I have some savings, I have this and that, that can help me get through this. And whereas a Latina, potentially a single mom, might experience this as yet another stressful event that has happened in her life, and experience it more profoundly, perhaps doesn't have, savings to rely on, not many connections in the community to be able to easily find another job. So I think, it's kind of the intersection of all these identities that we all hold and that are going to impact how we experience the event and then how we can bounce back from an event, right? And also what the actual event is. But Sarah, what do you think?
I very much agree with you, Dr. Vargas. Trauma doesn't happen in isolation, and both what's happening around the child at the moment of a traumatic event, what has happened before in their lives, and also what has happened to their family in the past is going to affect how they understand what has happened, make sense of what's going on, and also how maybe hopeful or helpless they feel in facing the challenges of the traumatic event. So yes, always thinking about the child within many concentric circles of family, community, society, what's helping happen politically. All those factors relate to one another and are going to shape both our understanding of what happened and also, as Dr. Vargas said, how do we bounce back? In my work working with immigrant youth, for example, we may have a youth who has been temporarily or in a long-term way separated from their primary caregivers. So they may be already carrying grief and at the same time a strength for like surviving, a survival instinct that is very strong. And yet the fear of losing loved ones is probably something very real for them on a day-to-day basis. So you can think about, for that child, for example, leaving home and going to school or separating from their trusted adults may feel more frightening, more scary than for a child who hasn't experienced separation from primary caregivers. At the same time, culture, Dr. Vargas mentioned culture really is the lens through how we see the world and how even the world trauma, like what do we think trauma is? When people say, oh, you've been through a traumatic experience, what I understand and what somebody from a different culture understands may be very, very different. Okay. How we use language. Yes, just reminding that trauma is just not a psychological thing that we go through, but it's also a social event. It is a cultural event in order to really see the child completely and understand their experience of that event. We really need to be very curious about all their identities and all the social influences in their life.
Great. Thank you for those responses. Our second question, how can certain factors increase a person's risk for trauma while other factors decrease those risks?
So again, this is when we're going to start to look at, okay, a child has been through something very difficult. What are some things that are going to make that experience even more challenging? As Dr. Vargas mentioned with, for example, economic strain, but also what are some factors that are going to help this child to bounce back, to begin healing, right? I always remind myself and encourage other people to be curious. We're almost like detectives, like looking for, again, what is going to make it maybe harder for this child, but what is going to help this child? Relationships. I think that's a place where I always kind of go to, right? Like, who do you trust? Who can you lean on? When you have a hard day, who do you talk to? Who are your people? These are always going to be the most important resiliency factors. We don't heal in isolation. We heal in community and with others. So who are your people? And again, thinking beyond maybe the obvious, beyond to maybe in school, where's who's somebody that you lean into? Maybe if you play sports, is there a team member, a coach, somebody there that you really feel comfortable with? So being curious and finding who is going to be in that child's team, who is going to be in their corner to support that child. Do they know each other? Maybe there's an opportunity to bring those people together and really form a team and get to know each other and think how everybody brings certain strengths to make that strong team for the child. So just got to being curious when you think you've asked all the questions and all the things, you don't. You can always go further and think broader, more creatively. It's always worth it. It's going to help you be more empathetic and also more effective in helping the child.
I think ditto. I mean, I fully agree with everything that Dr. Fernandez said. I think, I like to think of it as like, what are factors that can be protective, right? When a person has experienced an event that could be traumatic, or what makes them potentially vulnerable to experiencing trauma as a result of an event. So we want to look at all kinds of different things. And I really like how you said like the concentric circles, right? Because I think it's individual factors. I think it's community factors. I think it's societal factors, right? And so biologically, who are you? What are you potentially prone to? You might be more sensitive just as your biological makeup to an event that occurred, or your age. Sometimes children that are younger have a harder time with an event that occurred. Also the degree of how frightened someone was when an event occurred, right? If you felt really hopeless and helpless, that's going to impact what is happening, or your understanding, your meaning making of the situation. Supports like Dr. Fernandez mentioned is absolutely vital and important. And we're talking about supports in your family, right? But then outside circles, your community, your faith. Are there religious factors that you have community around that supports you? That's going to help with the meaning making, the support, even potentially financial support when something has happened. Also things like your environment, right? How stable is your environment? Do you have reliable folks around you that are going to be able to buffer the stress that is occurring? If your life is unpredictable to begin with, and then something happens, that's going to be a harder impact for you, right? Because you already kind of are feeling off base. Other things like what has happened to you beforehand, right? So if it's a one-time event, maybe like a car accident or something like that, yes, it's scary, but with people around you, communities around you, help and support, you can potentially mitigate that. But if it's something that's chronic and consistent, unfortunately, let's say like some form of child abuse, that is a factor that can make you more vulnerable to being traumatized. So the curiosity piece that Dr. Fernandez mentioned, the piece about really looking at a person all in an all-encompassing way, right? It's not just what happened. It's not just where you live. It's a combination of all these things.
When Dr. Vargas introduced herself, she mentioned that she gets to do the amazing work that she does in the community that she's familiar with, right? And I think that's so important for us to be familiar with the actual physical spaces and the communities and the streets and all the things that are maybe available or not available, but for us to really kind of dig into what does the surroundings of this child look like, because we also have to think about spaces, as we've talked about. Sometimes maybe home is not the safest or more calming place, right? So what other places are accessible to that child, whether it's another family member's home, whether it's an after-school program for that aligns with the child's interests. So again, I think it's finding safety in people and finding safety in alternative spaces. And I think, again, that takes that curiosity, right? Like talking to community, where do kids go? Where do they go after school? When there's, half day or a day off and the parents are working, what are the kids doing? What is available and accessible in this community? As well as I mentioned before, like what is happening at a larger scale in working with immigrant families right now? We know that there's a huge added stressor now with extremely frightening images and stories that everybody's exposed to, whether you choose to or not. You're going to come across really upsetting and scary realities that our communities are living, right? So how do we help families talk about these things in a way that feels, I don't know, maybe proactive, or maybe that there's a place of agency also, for the adults to have a space to vent with other adults, not with the kids, to release some of that kind of pressure that is building in so many families. So again, we think about the child, but what are the parents going through and how they're managing what is happening in their lives? Do they have places to safely unload and in that way kind of shield the children from those very difficult feelings? Asking the families, how are you talking about this at home? How are you talking about what's going on in the world and how they impact you, even if they're far away? I think a lot of families need a little bit of like holding hand, a little bit of coaching in order to tackle very difficult things. I think many people already have the skills, but it's just like a little bit of building the confidence of like, how do we talk about this as a family? So again, people, places, things, right? Like what makes us feel safe, what allows us to feel also connected and belonging. And with that, I would just maybe add like the importance of peer groups or peer supports for children and youth and adults to know that we're not the only ones going through something that is hard, painful, and maybe makes us feel embarrassed or ashamed at times. And to be able to see other people heal maybe ahead of us or alongside of us, or we're helping somebody kind of starting their process, for youth to feel like they can be helpful to somebody else in a time of need. I think it's also part of building resiliency, that they have a lot to offer through their own, who they are, but also through understanding that came from their own experiences. I think it's very healing. So I wanted to add that to what Dr. Vargas already said.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more question. How can awareness of these factors support me in helping a child as they heal?
A lot of this work starts with ourselves, right? To being aware of our own stories, our own experiences, and that how they have shaped who we are. So perhaps think about a challenging time that you experience in your childhood or adolescence. If that doesn't quite fit with you, maybe think about maybe a story, a book you read, a movie that you saw in which a character goes through a challenge or something traumatic, right? And again, put in that detective hat and look at what are the resiliency factors, what are the internal strengths, what are the external strengths that supported that child, what supports became important in the healing process, and also what got in the way of healing. So kind of it can be helpful to look at our own stories and then kind of examine those journeys of challenges, or look at examples that have maybe been influencing our lives, or we have maybe has been inspirational for us, of people that have overcome against all odds sometimes. I think we can all help it become more real by looking at real stories, because they're all around us and in us.
Yeah, I really like what you said. It made me think about taking an approach in the world of, being aware of all the factors that can impact, a child's response to a traumatic event and their ability to heal really sets one up for being able to support them, right? In whatever way one can do that personally. Say you are a teacher or something of that sort, you have potential capacity to have relationships, with children, to be their support system, their buffer. One of the things that I really want to highlight is this idea of like being a citizen of the world, right? It may not be something that is happening to you directly, but you having an understanding and awareness of factors that impact children and families, it can then provide you this, ability to be empathic, to support, to understand, also to really make meaning of the behavior that you might see in front of you, right? Like, instead of potentially harsh, understanding like, oh, they're just a misbehaving child. Oh, I really get where they're coming from. Some things happened to them. And so I can understand that their behaviors might be more of like an adaptation to survive, right? Rather than, they just are misbehaving. And so I think that allows for empathy, understanding, compassion, and thinking about, different things that you might be able to do. Like, how can you in your everyday life, create safety for children and families? You can have a welcoming environment wherever you are. You can be a person that is open to understanding and supporting. You can be someone that provides information. Like when kids go through certain things, they might behave in this way, or they might need, a shoulder to lean on. Like, can I do that? Right. And I think the citizen of the world idea really allows us all to be in community with each other and to support each other rather than, well, that's that family. They can handle that on their own. No, it's an everybody all hands in kind of approach. And we find the ways, even small things that we can do that might be able to support a child and family to heal from traumatic experiences. So I think it's about learning, being aware, maintaining that curiosity, and helping in whatever ways that we can. And it's about togetherness, right? And belongingness. When something has happened to us, we tend to feel very isolated and alone in the event. And so what you do need is other people around you. That's the human condition. We are creatures that are wired to connect with each other. And I think that's very key to healing.
Thank you both so much for those insightful responses. We have some reflection questions for you all in the audience, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to share our first one.
So a reflection question for folks listening and watching this video is, think about a challenging time that you experienced during your childhood, or a story that you heard from somebody that impacted you around overcoming an obstacle, and question, what were the factors that allowed for that healing to take place? What were the internal strengths, the outside supports, the maybe cultural factors that played a role in moving healing forward?
Thank you. And Wanda, you have one too?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a perfect segue from what we were just talking about to try and focus on how I, as an individual, can, focus on supports to reduce the risk factors that, a child or children in my own world, in my community, might experience. Challenging you to think of what might be your lane of how you can support a child. Is it relationships? Is it some of these protective factors that we discussed? Putting forward stability in the life of a family or a child. So thinking about what are the ways in which you as an individual might be able to support folks in and around your community.
And I think as any adult trying to be helpful and being a safe space for a child, you also don't have to do that in isolation. So think about the strengths that you already have that you can provide. But for things that are maybe more challenging for you or outside of your maybe comfort zone, or you're not sure, look for your own supports and community, and building alliances with others to support the children in your life. You're not supposed to be doing it all on your own.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here with us today. I hope the folks at home have some great reflections following those questions, and that's all we've got.